Hey everybody, Matt DeSantis here with just a quick note about today's episode. It was recorded just after the 2020 presidential election. Now a lot has happened since Teen Think Tank Project member Jack Baranoski and I chatted. There has been a widespread partisan disinformation campaign regarding the integrity of the election, a deadly insurrection at the Capitol, and a less than presidential transfer of power. And while a new administration brings new hope for America and a rejuvenation of our democratic spirit, the issues Jack and I discuss are unfortunate realities that exist regardless of the administration in the White House. So we hope you view this topic with a broad lens that is cognizant of both our past and present relationship with voting rights. On with the show.
Hi all, I'm Kelly Nagel. This week, my co-founder Matthew DeSantis continues his conversations with our Teen Think Tank Project students in an attempt to identify and understand the social justice issues they are most passionate about. Jack Baranoski, a 17-year-old Archbishop Wood High School honor student, joins Matt to talk about voting rights. In addition to his interest in performing arts, speech and debate, philosophy, and filmmaking, Jack is passionate about politics, specifically voters' rights and disenfranchisement. In a spirited conversation, Matt and Jack explore impediments to Americans exercising their right to vote and how voter disenfranchisement is a threat to our democracy. Enjoy.
And I think it's a very apt topic. Before we dive too deeply, just let's start with a basic question. What does the right to vote mean to you?
Well, to me, the right to vote means having the ability to actually shape the world around you and to participate within your community. I think it's an extremely important, vital part of a functioning society, and it should be secured for everyone.
Which sounds about right. To me, that sounds like the basis of democracy, right? Where we are a functioning society. We need a mechanism to keep functioning, and everybody needs to play a role in that. So we need to secure that. But let's let's engage in a little thought exercise here. And I will play the role of the United States of America as personified by Uncle Sam / the Statue of Liberty. Take your pick. All right. So we will run through a timeline of our democracy. 1776, we establish a firm union. Therefore, we have established the right to vote. But only if you're white and only if you own land. 1868. Okay, non-property owners, you're up. But still only if you're white. All right. 1870. All right, let's get with it. 15th Amendment. It's kind of making me do this, but it's probably about time anyway. It's okay to vote if you're black. Come on up. But wait. Only if you pay. Only if you can read. Only if you aren't intimidated by mobs of white people with torches burning. Whoa, not so fast, Native Americans. We're not talking about you yet. 1920. Talking 50 years after the 15th Amendment. Wait, women want the right to vote? What's going on here? All right, come on up, women. 1924. All right, Native Americans, you're in. Let's go. We go another 40 years before we even have the Civil Rights Act passed, which finally says all men and women, regardless of their race, religion, and education, have the right to vote. But we need to clarify that 1 year later with the Voting Rights Act, which gives the federal government the right to oversee and enforce the state's implementation of previous acts. Because that's the funny thing about us, about me here as Uncle Sam / Lady Liberty, is that in order to have all of these states be congruous, I got to give them a bunch of rights. And if I don't give them the right to control certain things, all hell is going to break loose. So I got to give them the right to control their own elections. But in 1965, I've had enough. We're going to put a little oversight on you, states. And in particular, I'm going to curb your rights to mess with this 1965 act, because the presumption is that your rights as a state should be taken into consideration when the federal government tries to introduce legislation that is counter your rights. But now this is too important. So in the 1965 Voting Rights Act, I'm going to put a clause. I'm going to put several sections, at least 5 of them, because 5 is the most important. And Section 5 curbs the state's ability to mess with voting rights. In particular, I'm going to introduce this idea of preclearance. What does that mean? Well, it's a fancy way of saying all you racist states, you need federal approval before you change anything having to do with election laws. Well, how do we know what the racist states are? Well, Section 4 puts a formula together. And if you fall within that formula, chances are you're racist. We're not going to call you racist, but we're going to say that you have a tenuous history with accessibility to voting rights. And this is how we're going to handle this. Any problems? I didn't think so. Step aside. We exist until 2013, when the Supreme Court of the United States strikes down Section 4 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Well, you didn't strike down Section 5, so we're all good, because Section 5 is the one that says states can't mess with this. But remember, Section 4 is the formula that we created to tell us who the Section 5 states are. Now, if that doesn't look like we've got a tenuous relationship with democracy, and the right to vote isn't as clear as establishing a functioning society, we're watching a sitting president assault the voting system and voter integrity in a way that has never even been fathomed before. So, as America, as Uncle Sam, as Lady Liberty, Jack, I say to you, what the hell are you even still doing here, man? This is not a good situation. Run. But what is it about this concept? What is it about this right to vote that keeps you around?
Well, especially looking at it today, I can see who is being denied the right to vote. And it's way more of a, it seems possible to actually put an end to people being disenfranchised of their right to vote. It seems like actually a possible goal to achieve within the next 10 to 20 years.
I'm here to engage in a conversation. I'm here to engage in a dialogue. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not an expert on voter rights, but I am a voter. So since I was 18, I voted in every election that I've been eligible, local, state, and federal election. And I'm also hopeful that it can be fixed. But when you talk about disenfranchisement, let's further define that, because I'm really seeing 2 types of disenfranchisement. Right there's probably specific terms of art in the political science community, but from a layman, I'm seeing 2 types of disenfranchisement, 2 types of suppression. I'm seeing a passive and an overt form of disenfranchisement, voter suppression. Talk to me a little bit about active disenfranchisement.
I'd say active disenfranchisement is something like the policies that are in place that would prevent felons from voting. Some examples of these policies are in only 3 states, which are Washington, D.C., Maine, and Vermont, felons never lose their right to vote at all. So in the other 47 states, they do. And in 16 states, felons only lose their right to vote while incarcerated, but they're granted immediate restoration after they're released. In 21 states, felons lose their right to vote during incarceration and for a period of time, typically doing parole or probation. Their rights are restored after this, but some felons may have to pay restitution before their rights are granted back to them. And in 11 states, some felons require a pardon from their state's governor for their rights to be restored. They face an additional waiting period, which includes their parole or probation after their sentence is completed, or they can lose their right to vote indefinitely for their crime.
While I typically don't like to advance the devil's advocate argument, because I'll let the actual opponent provide their opposition. However, in looking at this, there is a part of me that maybe says, well, okay, we're talking about felons. They're all the same kind of people, aren't they? They're all people who did something wrong and they're paying the price. Some are paying more than others, but at the end of the day, we've taken away their right universally and evenly, haven't we?
I'd say that's false. It's a bit of a faulty way of thinking, because these disenfranchisement restrictions disproportionately affect people in Black and brown communities. According to the Sentencing Project, 1 in 16 African Americans that are of voting age is disenfranchised. Now, this rate is 3.7 times greater than that of non-African Americans, and over 6.2% of the adult African American population is disenfranchised. But only 1.7% of the non-African American population is disenfranchised.
Okay, I'm listening. You got me. My ears are perked up. But is this just a byproduct of that? Or is this an intended consequence?
I'd say this is an intended consequence, and it's actually something that I would call the weaponization of disenfranchisement, because it's clear that minority groups are being targeted through these systems so that they end up in a position where they are disenfranchised and cannot vote to better their situation.
Okay.
Well, the first one I would like to talk about is the school to prison pipeline, which is when students from disadvantaged backgrounds are likely to be introduced to the criminal justice system because of their school's policing policies. Since 2000, the amount of out-of-school suspensions has increased by 10%, which is double the amount that it was in the 1970s. And according to the Education Department's Office of Civil Rights, Black students are 3 times more likely to be expelled or suspended than white students. And research done in Texas has found that students that have been suspended before are more likely to be held back a grade or to drop out of school. Now, this amount of suspended students has gone up because schools have adopted these zero tolerance policies because they were concerned about crime. And an example of this zero tolerance policy is the Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994, which mandated year-long suspensions to any student who was caught bringing a weapon to school. Now, that may sound like a good thing on the surface, but it was very problematic because the term weapon was interpreted very loosely. And in some cases, you would have kids that got expelled for making guns with their fingers or even chewing a Pop-Tart into a gun shape. And more than just the zero tolerance policies, this broken windows theory of policing was adopted by schools, which is the theory that if you crack down on small offenses, you'll make people feel safer and discourage more crime. And in a school setting, this translates to suspending or expelling students for minor things like talking back to teachers, skipping school, or being generally disobedient or disruptive. And more than just those policies, schools began to have police stationed in them. Those police were originally designated to protect students from mass shootings, but they ended up just being a policing force present in schools that would arrest students. And in the 2011 to 2012 year, 92,000 students were arrested, most of which were on low-level violations. And these schools began to send students to juvenile courts by having them be arrested by a station police officer or by referring them to court as a discipline. All that makes it way more common for students to have juvenile records. And since schools have adopted these policies, 11 times as many students have been sent to juvenile courts. Now, this is an instance where more police does not solve crime. It actually causes more crime by sending students down a crime-ridden path, by getting them involved in the criminal justice system from a very young age.
Thank you very much, man. Thanks for sitting with me. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for being part of the Teen Think Tank Project.
Matt, what a great conversation with Jack about voter disenfranchisement and the weaponization of disenfranchisement. There are many complex topics Jack discusses, and next week I'll dig into these issues and explore the barriers to exercising the right to vote with Jessica Ronan. She's a program coordinator for the Eagleton Institute Center for Youth Political Participation. Don't forget to subscribe and download the podcast to catch the second half of our conversation on voting rights. For now, I'd like to thank Jack and my Teen Think Tank Project co-founder Matthew DeSantis for the engaging conversation. I'd also like to thank all those who made this podcast possible. Our wonderful production team, the George Mountain Group, and Winnie the Moog for our theme song, Success of the Whole Team. Most importantly, I'd like to thank you, the listener. Let us know that you're listening. Subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And follow the podcast at problem_pod. For more information on today's topic, or to find out more about social justice programming for exceptional teens, please follow the Teen Think Tank Project at teen_think tank. Until next week, I'm Kelly Nagel.